Music from Coldplay coming your way in the next few minutes. But first, we're going to talk Everton Football Club. And I'm delighted to say that Steve Dickinson is back with us this Saturday. Steve has co-written a book on Everton under Farhad Moshiri. It's available to buy now on Amazon. It is the unofficial Everton timeline, 2014 to 2023, the Moshiri years. And Steve joins us on the line. Steve, it's really good to talk to you. I know this is short notice, so thank you for coming on air today. And we should begin, I guess, with a bit of positivity for Evertonians. The news that Everton are now safe from relegation, which has got to come as good news, hasn't it?
It certainly has, Paul, and it's great to be back after a few weeks since I've been on the show. And since that time, Everton have had 3 wins and last night's draw. So I think when I came on the show, you asked me what my thoughts were about the next 3 home games against Forest, Liverpool and Brentford. And I said, well, if I'm being optimistic, I'd be looking for 7 points. And, of course, the Blues actually achieved 9 points out of 9 there. And then with the draw last night, which was a hard-fought draw away at Luton, things have really progressed much better for Everton since we last spoke.
I think the bizarre thing last night, Steve, is that Evertonians could watch the Luton game and just enjoy the game. There was no stress, there was no anxiety riding on the result. And as you say, when we spoke in the studio, I think 2 weeks ago, before that run of 3 games in which Everton got 9 points, it would have been unthinkable that there was nothing riding on the Luton result for Everton.
It certainly would. In fact, the first relief, I said to my mate who I was sitting next to at the ground at the Derby game, I'd come to the Derby match feeling relaxed. It was bizarre. We'd won, of course, against Forest, which was an enormous 6-pointer. And then coming to the Derby game, I felt quite relaxed. And I just hoped that relaxation that I was feeling up there in the top balcony was out there with the players. And I think it was. I think they've ever since the Forest game, I think they've played with the weight of relegation off their shoulders. And, that's been transmitted out onto the pitch.
It has indeed. And it is a double-edged sword in a way, because clearly Evertonians celebrate the fact that they have avoided relegation. But at the same time, the saga that is 777 continues. The future of the club is still much uncertain, of course, Steve, with the news we've had this week and continued debate about the ability of 777 to take on the club. I just want to get a sense check from you, really, Steve, as to how you assess where Everton are right now as a football club.
Well, regarding the proposed takeover of Farhad Moshiri's shares and therefore the club by 777 partners. So far, 777 have been unable to satisfy the 4 conditions that were outlined by the Premier League a month or so ago. And just to remind ourselves what they were, the Premier League insisted that 777 was repaid MSP Sports Capital their loan of 158 million, which had been loaned towards the building of Bramley-Moore Dock Stadium. That secondly, that they put into an escrow account the running costs for Everton until the end of the season. Thirdly, that they would capitalise the now almost 200 million that 777 have loaned to Everton. So if they took over the club, they would put that loan into capital and therefore not require the loan to be repaid. And fourthly, that proof of funds to complete Bramley-Moore Stadium would be in place. And it's believed that although the stadium is still progressing well and on plan for completion by the end of this calendar year, there's still around £100 million still to pay to the contractors for all of the remaining work. So those were the 4 conditions. And as far as we're aware, 777 still have not met those conditions and have not yet been granted permission by the Premier League for the deal to go ahead. In addition to that, things have got actually a lot harder for 777 only in the last few days. Firstly came the news, I think on Wednesday, in fact Tuesday I believe, that one of its subsidiary companies, the low-cost airline Bonza Airlines, based in Australia, had itself gone into administration. And only this morning came the news of a court case that's underway in the United States, where 777 are currently being sued in the District Court, Southern District of New York, by Leadenhall Capital Partners LLP, who accuse 777 of fraud, claiming the Miami-based investment firm borrowed against $350 million of assets that it either didn't own or didn't exist. And, you know, these are serious allegations. This goes beyond cash flow problems or concern about investment in dubious companies. When it comes to this level of financial fraud, they're very serious allegations. And 777's co-founder, Josh Wander, Leadenhall alleges, has double-pledged assets backing loans to the firm and admitted to fundamental breaches of agreements, according to the complaint that they filed late yesterday night in New York's federal court. We have no way of knowing how that case will turn out, of course, but those are the charges that have been brought against 77 in the last 24 hours.
And I think it's fair to say, I mean, that there's a lot of very high-level intellectual debate here about, you know, the businesses themselves. And to the layman, a lot of this information might be above all of our heads. But I think when you just consider the fact that when you talk about Bonza, the airline that went into voluntary administration on Tuesday, I mean, clearly for a company owned by 777 to enter voluntary administration, it just sends red warning letters, doesn't it, Steve, in terms of their financial capability?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, there are more red flags about 777 than you'd see on the COP on a European night. And, you know, none of us Evertonians want this. We just want an investor that cares about the club, that has got deep enough pockets to deal with the finances around the club, that's got money in hand to invest in rebuilding the squad, which is very thin and is going to be even thinner by the end of the season when a number of contracts of players are ended naturally. You know, you're absolutely right, Paul. Most football fans at Evertonians, myself included, our main interest in the club is in seeing how things are turning out on the field. But we have to have some concern and care about who the owners are, and because this will directly affect what goes on the field. So, you know, it's sad to see how these things are panning out at the moment. I think I and many other Evertonians hope that Farhad Moshiri sees all of these red flags and opens up the bidding to other parties beyond 777 and hopefully finds buyers for the club that will put us on a more level footing.
Yeah, this is it. And we should mention as well that on Tuesday, Everton did receive a delayed payment from 777 of 16 million for day-to-day operational costs. Now, this payment was supposed to be paid early this month, but I believe that a source close to Mr. Moshiri says that the latest payment, although delayed, shows, to quote them, a proper commitment to taking over the club, and they have supported previous working capital when asked to do so. It is a strange situation, isn't it, here, Steve? Because despite 777 seemingly being unable to meet the terms laid down by the Premier League to complete the takeover, they have continued to put money into the club, haven't they?
They have, and it's a paradox. I can only imagine how badly the employees of Bonza, who are now at loose end, haven't been paid themselves, are likely to be made redundant by the administrator in the coming days. You wonder what they think about what's happened there with their parent company 777, on one hand paying money out to a football club it doesn't own, while not being able to pay their wages or secure their jobs. From what information I have, the money that 777 have provided to Everton, significant as it is now around 200 million, is not their money. It's been borrowed. They borrow it at a high interest rate, and they charge Everton an even higher interest rate when they lend it to Everton. So it's just a form of borrowing. It's not money that's been given, and it's just increased Everton's external debt level.
It has indeed. And I just wonder as well, Steve, is there a plan B here? Because if this deal with 777 should collapse, where would that leave Everton Football Club?
Well, I think that question can only be answered by Mr. Moshiri. He's still, by all accounts, a wealthy individual. Much of his billions are tied up with the shares that he owns in Alisher Usmanov's group companies, USM Holdings and Metallo Invest. And those companies and Alisher Usmanov, of course, are still subject to sanctions by the UK and European governments because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So a lot of Moshiri's wealth is tied up actually in bank accounts in Russia, which he can't take out of that country at the moment, we hear. But my hope is that if 777 cannot meet the conditions laid down by the Premier League, then that deal is dead. And the sooner Mr. Moshiri faces up to that, the better. He either needs to find alternative bidders who can come through and meet the conditions, meet the requirements of the Premier League, or he needs to continue funding Everton himself somehow until such time as the club is completed the stadium and is in a position to hopefully attract better quality of investors. Could be 6 months from now.
And certainly time will tell as to what will happen with the sale of the club to 777 or whoever. We'll see what develops with that. I just very briefly, Steve, just wanted to talk to you about Sean Dyche. I know that Sean Dyche had come in for quite a bit of criticism in recent months in terms of the team's performance, but we should also acknowledge today that had it not been for those 2 lots of point deductions for which Sean Dyche cannot be held accountable, Everton would be finishing this season around about mid-table. For you, do you believe that Sean Dyche is the right man to carry this club forward into the next season?
I've said throughout this season, and we wrote in the book, my co-author and I, Lyndon Lloyd, we wrote in the book that Sean Dyche has shown tremendous leadership for the club. Whatever else we feel about what's happened on the field, he's been not only the manager, the first team coach, but he's been the voice of the club. In the absence of a board this year, an absence of any leadership shown by Farhad Moshiri towards the club, then Sean Dyche has been really the only external voice for the club, and he's done tremendously well. We can only imagine what a difficult task it's been to keep himself, his staff and the team motivated when the Premier League have messed around with Everton to the extent that they have this year. If the Premier League had had their way, Everton would have been docked 17 points, whereas we were docked a mere 8 points. So, yeah, Paul, I'm with you on that. I think Sean Dyche has done a tremendous job, and I hope that he's leading us into the new season.
And I think it's fair to say that Dyche made no secret to the fact that when they avoided relegation last year, he knew this season was going to be difficult, possibly maybe not as difficult as it turned out to be. But I think you've seen with Sean Dyche, you've seen the positive attitude, and I think as well a real sense of the reality of the situation as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'd all like to be playing attractive, free-flowing football. We'd all like to be emulating Manchester City, wouldn't we? But with the squad of players that he inherited, and then even more players such as Gordon were sold, then we've really been, we had a very thin squad with limited capabilities, and he's got a tune out of them. And as you rightly say, without the 8 points deduction, we'd be a mid-table team. It's been a much better finish to this season than it has the last two seasons, when I and all other Evertonians remember the Crystal Palace game, going into that with fear and dread that we could be relegated, and then into last season with the final game of the season going to determine our fate against Bournemouth. So to finish with an 8-point deduction and to have avoided relegation with 3 or 4 games still to spare is steady progress, and long may that continue.
It is indeed, and I think it's fair to say as well, Steve, that Evertonians have looked at these last few performances and maybe thought to themselves, where were these performances earlier on in the season? Because they've clearly pulled it out of the hat. And we should mention we have seen some outstanding performances this season from Jarrad Branthwaite. Jordan Pickford, of course, continues to deliver as well. But the immediate future of these players, as Everton players, is going to be dependent, isn't it, to some degree, on what happens with 777 during the summer?
Very much so. I have really enjoyed watching the players you mentioned there, Jarrad Branthwaite, Jordan Pickford, to name but two. Let's hope that they are not sold, because I think if they are sold this summer, then the money will not likely be reinvested into rebuilding the team, but will just go towards repaying debts to various people. So I hope that Branthwaite and Pickford are still in the lineup on, I think it's the 17th of August, the start of the new Premier League season, but there's no guarantee of that.
Absolutely. Time will tell. Steve, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for coming on at short notice for us today. Just a reminder that your book is still available to purchase. It is the unofficial Everton timeline, 2014 to 2023, the Mashiri years. And it's a book, Steve, isn't it, that really goes back to the very beginning of the discussions between Bill Kenwright and Mashiri about Mashiri taking over the club, which happened in 2016, and the fallout from that over the 7-8 years since then. It is a brilliant read, and if anyone listening to this wants to get a copy, I think you said to me last time it's available to buy on Amazon. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. If anyone wants to grab a copy of the book, then just go to Amazon and search for the unofficial Everton timeline, and it's available in paperback form and Kindle form. And the audiobook is in production at the moment as well. We'll have more news about that soon.